about another PC build.
It's really strange. They shipped this motherboard like as is. Like they put a label right on the box and just shipped it so that everyone could see what it was.
But everything else, save the case, fit into this one large box. And I need a bit of a refresher. I forget what I ordered for this one. The budget should come in at around 800 bucks. So relatively attainable, and I think that the parts choices here will make a lot of sense for folks who are looking to maximize gaming performance specifically. So to start, we have an Intel Core i5-12400F. Now, I know Intel's been getting a lot of heat lately, and I would definitely stay away from anything higher end 13th or 14th gen. 12th gen seems to be kind of skating by. It doesn't seem to be as affected by the voltage issues and whatnot that are in the 14th gen, in particular the 13th to 14th gen higher core count, higher end CPUs. This 12400F though should be fine, and we got it for 100 USD on Amazon, brand spanking new.
And to cool it off, I bought a Thermalright Assassin X120. This should keep our CPU nice and cool, and it should run a lot quieter than the stock cooler. This 16 gig kit of DDR4 was like 32 bucks, pretty much a no-brainer in my book. The power supply, I've chosen a Corsair CX550M, not the greatest on the market, not the most reliable, but still a solid contender with a decent warranty. It's semi-modular, so you can kind of pick and choose what cables you want to connect, and it doesn't break the bank. It's difficult to find cheap, reliable power supplies nowadays, so I went with Corsair. I'm definitely taking a chance on storage here. I found this Orico drive, a brand I've never really heard of, had okay reviews, and they're selling 1 terabyte NVMEs like this one for around 50 bucks, which makes the price per gig pretty incredible, but they aren't advertising their write speeds anywhere, so this could be a really bad move. We'll figure out by the end of the video, so maybe don't buy this just yet.
But for this last component, you should most definitely consider something like an RX 6750 XT in an $800 budget. This is one of AMD's best, most competitive, most value-oriented graphics cards on the new market today. This thing will pack a heck of a punch in 1080p and 1440p gaming. You can buy it brand new for around 300 USD on Amazon, and while it might not be as good a deal as something you'd find on the used market, you do get that peace of mind buying new with a decent warranty as well, and from a great brand like XFX that makes really good looking cards at that. We'll get to the case choice a bit later, but for now, I wanted to just give you a roundup of everything that we've selected for this rig apart from that, and it's gonna squeeze in at around 720 bucks all in. So if you wanted to spend, say, 80 bucks on a case, that'll bring you to around an $800 total. If you wanted to spend more than that, maybe 150, even $200 on a case, which I wouldn't necessarily agree with in this tight of a budget, then that would bring you closer to 900 bucks. But this is the core of the rig, and I think that it's spec'd very nicely for value-oriented gaming. So then, let's get to building. Are you ready? Stay with me. Planning a PC build like us? Consider checking out our sponsor, VIP SCD Key. Their Windows 10 and 11 OEM keys sell for a fraction of retail and will unlock the full potential of the OS. They'll also remove those pesky activation watermarks without relying on sketchy third-party software. This month only, you can snag Windows 10 and 11 Home and Pro OEM keys for 30% off using our promo code GSVIP. Simply click the link below corresponding to your version of Windows, click Buy Now, and pay with a secure payment method like PayPal. At checkout, don't forget our code, again, GSVIP, and watch as 30% ripped right off the top, bringing Windows 10 down to 15 bucks and Windows 11 to 21. After your order's been placed, hop over to the User Center and click View Keys/Codes, and there you have it, a genuine OEM Windows key that'll lock to your combination of hardware. Just note that you may need to reactivate when swapping things like motherboards by nature of how OEM keys work, but it sure beats the heck out of retail pricing any day of the week. And be sure to stick around till later when we'll show you how to activate Windows with said key. In the meantime, check out those links below, and don't forget our special discount code, again, GSVIP, to save 30%. Let's kick things off with the assembly of the platform. Let's get the motherboard out of the box. Yeah, would you have a look? This is a sweet looking board. It didn't break the bank either because it's only a B series chipset board, which means we can't overclock, but we don't have an unlocked SKU CPU to pair it with anyway, so not a huge deal there. It's gonna keep the cost down. Now we can throw in our Core i5-12400F. I also don't wanna leave my AMD friends out of the mix, so if you're intent on only buying from Team Red for your CPU, here is a list breakdown of what I would do with the same budget, but choosing an AMD CPU instead of an Intel one. Obviously, the motherboard has to change as well, and depending on the platform you opt for, you might need DDR5 versus DDR4. Thankfully, with these Intel boards, we have a bit of choice. We could choose a DDR4 board or a DDR5 one, and that of course will help keep costs down if we choose the former. Either way, you'll have 6 solid cores at your disposal with simultaneous multi-threading. Some Intel CPUs, especially in the newer generations, will mix things up with P cores and E cores. That tends to complicate the decision a tad, but as long as you have 6 performance cores at a minimum for gaming, I'd say that's just fine in an $800 budget. We're gonna lower down this retention arm, and there we go, CPU installed. Oh, and would you look at that? Our DDR4 actually matches accents on our motherboard. This DIMM is not, is this a DDR5 board? I thought I bought a DDR4 board, but those notches are not in the right place. Oh no.
So yeah, I thought this was the board I bought because you can see DDR4 written right there, but it wasn't. I'm gonna put this one in the description because this is the one you should buy if you wanna use DDR4 instead of 5. Of course, with 5, you'll always have the future-proof argument, but I don't really think you should be prioritizing future-proofness in an $800 budget all that much. If you only have $800 to spend today, you're probably not going to upgrade for a few years, and if you do, it'll be piece by piece. It'll probably be graphics card first, maybe power supply. The platform will last you several years regardless.
Let's also not forget that Intel doesn't tend to suffer as much with DDR4 versus DDR5. We're just going to assume that I'm using DDR4 here, and again, that's how it's going to be linked below. I cannot believe I made that mistake. Here I was hyping up the fact that you could swap between DDR4 and DDR5 with the latest Intel platform, but I went and screwed it all up. Wow, this NVMe even comes with its own heat spreader of sorts. We're not going to be using it, but oh, it's something. It is slightly scratched though. We'll just carefully install it here, and it looks like this locking mechanism is, well, I guess it just stays like that. Okay, that's cool, it's toolless.
Would it shock you to find out this CPU cooler only costs 17 bucks on Amazon? Thermalright's doing some crazy stuff with their pricing, and this reminds me sort of the OG Hyper 212 days. Installation was also super straightforward, as you'd expect for most of these smaller tower coolers. This, again, is gonna be plenty for a lower TDP chip like the 12400. That's also why we were able to pair a 6750 XT with something as low as a 550 watt power supply. It's going to be fine. And now that our CPU fan is locked in, we can get this entire platform installed into our case.
And I think the NZXT H6 Flow would be a pretty cool candidate.
You can usually find these for under 100 bucks, and there's just so much room for activities. And while it might look a bit empty in here with the hardware configuration we're after, of course this case would support tons of water cooling if we wanted, this does at least give us some room to expand in the future. And after taking care of things like USB 3 and Type-C, as well as front panel, all of our basic wiring ahead of time, we can move on to our power supply install. So this is not gonna be a very large unit. It should fit in most mid-towers, even if you choose something smaller than the H6 here. It's gonna sit right here. We'll make sure the fan is facing outward since this entire panel is ventilated. Tightening down with 4 632 screws. 24 pin and others are wired up. And would you have a look at the cable management back end? This was like zero effort. I didn't try to make things look super pretty. It was just a result of how much space is available. We have all of these Velcro straps, which is really nice, running all the way up, even the top side of the motherboard. So for things like CPU power, 8-pin APS, you can run all that up here, fan cables, etc. All the rest of your stuff can just be wrapped up here in these Velcro straps along the side, next to these diagonal fans for intake. And that's pretty much it. We don't really have anything else to deal with here, no cable extensions. Even if we had those, there's just tons of room here left over. And that means we can move on to our last component, our RX 6750 XT, our sweet, sweet graphics card. This thing is so good. It comes packed with 12 gigs of VRAM. It's good for up to 1440p gameplay comfortably. And this one's also a 3-fan card, so it's a bit larger. It looks a little bit more premium, let's say. Only need to free up 2 slots here, but this is more like a 2.5 slot card. It is a bit longer. It will extend further than a conventional ATX motherboard, so we'll need that extra space toward the front. And there we are. Wow, that looks so good. We'll get this buttoned up, and just like that, we have a beautiful gaming PC that costs us around $800 USD. And this thing definitely kicks butt in games. I'm about to show you that. But first, let's take a minute to appreciate the aesthetics of this one. I'll talk through some of the parts choices, some of the things you might notice that are omitted, especially in a case like this. Now, I've intentionally gone after a black and white theme. I didn't want any color here, but you could very easily spice things up with some custom cable extensions, maybe 20, 30 bucks extra, that will really liven things up in here. You could also pick other cards that have other accents included, but I really like this XFX version of the 6750 XT. We've actually used it in some previous builds as well. I stand by its design choices. I also really appreciate how cool this card runs under load. Now, yes, the CPU cooler does look a bit strange in here. I intentionally wanted just a larger case that doesn't break the bank necessarily, and the H6 definitely does that. It still get great airflow, but we're missing a few
let's say, creature comforts. We don't have any fans on the bottom. We could fit two 140s down here to fill up the empty space in what would otherwise be the basement. We also don't have an exhaust fan, although the tower cooler in this orientation will be exhausting air directly out the back, which was intentional somewhat. It just does look a bit empty, and you could very quickly correct that with maybe a 3-pack of fans. Other than that though, I'm very happy with the way this one turned out. All that's left to do, I suppose, is power on, and then we'll jump into those benchmarks.
You know, I suppose this was kind of an underwhelming power on situation here because we don't have any RGB of any kind. It looks almost the same as it did when it was off, but I still think it looks pretty sleek.
If you've gotten as far as we have and you've installed your operating system, an instructional video is linked in the description, make sure you've gotten a Windows key from our sponsor, VIP SCD Key. Copy it from the User Center and navigate to the Activation tab within Windows Settings. You can get there very quickly by typing Activate in your search tab and clicking Enter. From here, click Change or Add Product Key, paste your code, and allow Windows to run its checks, and then click Activate. Give it a minute and you should notice your watermark disappear along with a message that Windows has been successfully activated. If you're having issues with your key, triple check that you've entered it correctly and that it corresponds to your version of Windows. This is especially important for OEM keys, which is why we stressed this earlier. VIP SCD Key's special sale is happening now for a limited time, so make sure to snag a key or two before it's too late. And be sure to use my special offer code GSVIP for a sweet discount on a variety of options, including Windows 10, Windows 11, and more. But how about we move on to those benchmarks, starting first with 3D Mark Time Spy. This is a DX12 1440p synthetic. We score better than 65% of all submitted results with this exact system. You can see our overall score is 12,676. Graphics score is about 13,500-ish, and our CPU score is just under 10,000. Now this suggests that there's going to be a slight CPU bottleneck in some games, although if you're bumping the resolution up or bumping up in-game settings, majority of the time the graphics card is going to be the component stressed, so I don't mind this slight disparity. All in all, I would say this is a fairly balanced rig. Next up is GTA 5, also 1440p, high settings across the board with no anti-aliasing or advanced graphics enabled. You can see that we're pretty much hitting the frame limiter while flying. That tends to drop just a tad when we get to that road scene, but overall still averaging very healthily above 120 FPS. This is an older title, so this is a bit of a gimme if you ask me, but it's still a game that many people play today. We're looking forward to GTA 6 whenever that decides to launch, but for now, this game will play just fine. Next on the list is a racing title, F1 23. I know this isn't the newest of the franchise, but I don't really like the physics of the new one all that much, so I've stuck with 23, and it plays very well on this machine, averaging well over 120 FPS, actually closer to 200 in some instances, and that is thanks in part to FSR 2. That's kind of taking some of the load off of the graphics card. You can see our CPUs across the board being leveraged pretty heavily. All 12 threads are somewhere in the mid 40s to 50s on average. We're using about 9 gigs of video memory as well in this resolution. We expect that to be bumped up just a tad when we move to 4K. But all in all, very happy with this. No frame time spikes or anything, stuttering's at a bare minimum, and it's overall just a super smooth play. We'll end things on a much tougher title though, Starfield, also in 1440p. All of these titles we tested were in 1440p, which I think is a fair balance of both CPU and GPU workloads for a lot of titles out there. Starfield is very intensive. This thing is going to saturate pretty much any graphics card on the market that you could practically throw at it. And we have FSR 3 helping us as well here, which is getting us just barely 60 FPS on average. I really love that we can just float around this moon here. Overall, it's okay. It's not going to be stellar, but this is more game dependent than anything else. You'd need to throw something like an RTX 3080 or 4080 at a game like this in order to even get close to 100 FPS in this resolution. I'll still say though that this game plays very well at 60 FPS. Not the end of the world. Still a very beautiful game to look at as well. So as you can see, this thing is a healthy gamer for its price point. I would say that it's probably among the best value rigs you can buy. Obviously, you're going to have your exceptions. Some folks are going to find crazy deals on brand new stuff. Some folks are going to dip into the used market, and that's where you're going to really be able to maximize value. Do you know that for the same price as this RX 6750 XT, I could have bought a used RTX 3080? That is a very, very big jump in performance. And depending on the title, it could be even bigger of a jump because you'd have DLSS support and other things like that. But I don't want to mix and match, used and new hardware. If we're going to do a used build, we'll just commit to that in a separate video. I know a lot of folks are again, a bit concerned about buying used graphics cards, especially ones that may have been mined with and there's no real way to tell. So I just stuck with new stuff here. I think the RX 6750 XT is among the best new cards you can buy for around $300. Threw it into here. It fared very well in 1440p. Of course, if you drop that resolution to 1080p, like we said, you're going to see an even higher frame rate. I just wouldn't stretch it all the way to 4K for most titles. I don't really think it makes sense for most builds sub 1,000 USD. Now, if you would like to build something very similar to this here, remember I'm going to give you the original DDR4 version of this build, which I think makes more sense. It's a little more justifiable because DDR5 is still a little expensive. I'm also going to include an AMD version for those who are insistent on avoiding Team Blue for reasons that we mentioned a bit earlier. Obviously, Intel, again, is getting a lot of flack. They're getting a lot of heat, and I think justifiably so. I understand the hesitation to buy anything from Team Blue at this point. I totally get that, and that's why, again, I want to have an AMD alternative. I do think 12th gen Intel is going to give you a little more value, dare I say, than something like a 7600X, but that's not really apples to apples because that's the latest from AMD. And of course, that's going to cost a little more. It's the most modern, the most relevant from Team Red. So perhaps a better alternative, and what you're going to probably see in the description, I'll have to kind of look at the prices, is a 5000 series AMD build instead of a 7000 series one. You can get something like a 57X 3D or 5800X 3D bundle, or maybe just like a regular 5700X paired with an AM4 motherboard and of course DDR4, and you're still going to be set. I mean, it's kind of end of life by the time you get to 5000 series stuff. You can't upgrade beyond that, but again, I don't think you should be prioritizing an upgrade path in either of these builds in this price range. Don't compromise performance in the now for the sake of future-proofness 3 or 4 years from now. That's 3 or 4 years of lost performance you're not going to get back because you made decisions now that hurt that gaming performance. That's just my take, but be sure to check out all of those links in the description, all those different build variants, and let me know what you think is your best. Maybe if you want to make changes to the list we have, leave those comments down below as well. Any feedback you have, that would be greatly appreciated. Thank you so much for watching this one. Consider leaving a like, subscribing, and sticking around for the next. My name is Greg. Thanks for building with me.